we're going to go through a number of slides that give some basic facts and information about how we got to the current moment of conflict, and really open to engaging more when we get in the Q&A if there are areas that we want to zoom in on from there. Steve, maybe we'll just get right into the slides. Of course, there was a lot that happened before the UN Partition Plan was put forward. There was the Balfour Declaration, San Remo. There were a number of violent eruptions that occurred in the 20s and 30s. There's a lot that we could cover in advance of this, but I think for the purposes of our conversation, I wanted to start with the Partition Plan, which sort of set the table for everything that has come afterwards. The UN basically called for, in a resolution, the partition of the land of Israel, of British Mandatory Palestine, into two states for two peoples, one for the Jewish inhabitants and one for the Arab inhabitants, so that both could achieve their right to self-determination in the aftermath of the Second World War. And the Jewish community leadership, of course, accepted this. And there's a famous quote from David Ben-Gurion that if they were offered a piece of land the size of a postage stamp, they would accept. And unfortunately was rejected by the Arab leadership, and a war ensued. Steve, let's move on to the next slide. The War of Independence, which we'll see on the next slide. There we go. The first phase of this, in the immediate aftermath of the partition proposal and resolution, was domestic. It was a civil war conflict with attacks by local Palestinian Arabs against Jews. And the second phase, an invasion of Israel by the neighboring countries and one further afield by 6 Arab armies in 1948. This was the War of Independence. The goal was to eliminate Israel and to divide the land among the states and really fulfill this sort of emergent concept of pan-Arabism, where this entire land would be an Arab territory, and there would be no Jewish self-determination in our ancestral home. Steve, can we go to the next slide? The War of Independence ended in an armistice agreement in 1949, where and you can see it in the slide, that's the pre-1967 war, where you can see the area of the Gaza Strip in dark brown and the West Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, in light brown. Those were under the control of Egypt and Jordan, respectively. And in 1967, with the Egyptian military moving into the Sinai Desert, poised for invasion on Israel's border and closing the Straits of Tiran, which you can sort of make out in the Red Sea, which was the main way for ships to get in and out of the port of Eilat, it became clear that war was in the offing, and Israel engaged in a preemptive strike in order to defend itself from that pending invasion. The Six-Day War obviously was a quick victory for Israel, in which it captured a significant amount of territory, as you can see from the maps here. And there was a great debate within Israel what to do with this afterwards, with an understanding that these territories, many of them, could be returned to the Arab countries for peace, for concessions, to move beyond this state of conflict. All of that was preempted by the Arab League, which was the gathering of all of the Arab states together, which met in Khartoum in Sudan and issued the infamous 3 no's: no to recognition of Israel, no to negotiations with Israel, and no to peace with Israel. And that set the stage for ongoing, continuing conflict moving forward. Steve, move on to the next slide, please. Although that didn't kill the quest for peace. Despite that, Israel put forward multiple peace proposals to resolve these territorial disputes. And you can see with regard to, there's a peace agreement that was achieved with Egypt, a peace agreement that's been achieved with Jordan. And these on this map, which I think really highlights the point well, shows the successive proposals that have been put forward by Israel with regard to the territory known as the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And you can see in 1968 what the concern was. They wanted to make sure there was still a buffer of Israeli control between their borders with Jordan and with Egypt. In 2000, you can see that the offer was substantively larger, and larger still in 2008. The 2000 offer was destroyed by the Second Intifada, which unleashed an unprecedented wave of violence targeting Israeli civilians. And in 2008, the last offer that was seriously put on the table and considered in diplomatic circles was rejected as well, which, as you can see, was even more concessive and larger. I think that context for consistent efforts by Israel, including with the ceding of territory for peace, is an important part of the story that's often missed. There's a lot of people who talk about the acquisition of territory in the Six-Day War, and not a lot of focus on what came subsequently in terms of Israel trying to reach peace, but unfortunately having that rejected in almost every case. Steve, can we move on to the next one? Which brings us to a focus in on Gaza. Israel, recognizing that peace, a comprehensive peace with the Palestinians, was not in the offing during the Second Intifada, took the step to disengage completely from the Gaza Strip, pulling out all military presence, all Israelis who were living there, removing them from Gaza in 2005. Soon thereafter, Hamas won the Palestinian Authority elections in Gaza, and of course, there has not been another Palestinian election since. But polling shows that if there were to be one, Hamas would win those as well, even today. But winning the election wasn't the end. Hamas violently seized Gaza in 2007 in a coup where political opponents were thrown off buildings, murdered in the streets, and forced to flee the Gaza Strip at gunpoint. And that is the political reality we are at today, with Hamas dominating the Gaza Strip, where a number of other terrorist organizations operate, and with multiple, episodes of significant rocket fire terrorizing neighboring communities in Israel, and further afield into the center of Israel, and a number of wars that have erupted since. In the lead up to the October 7th attack, it was actually a period of relative optimism. If you remember, in May, there was a hot conflict that was led by Palestinian Islamic Jihad firing hundreds, if not thousands, of rockets into Israel, and Hamas stayed out of it. They stayed quiet. And the perception was that because of an unprecedented or economic opening of Gaza, where up to 20,000 Gazans were coming into Israel for work each day, and more opportunities to bring in goods and export goods were opening up, that Hamas was more interested in stability and prosperity than they were in their stated and demonstrated mission to destroy Israel. And unfortunately, what we learned on October 7th was that was just not the right time for Hamas to engage its operation that had been in the planning for quite some time. And we are all familiar with the grotesque and devastating results of that operation on that day that they undertook. The map that you're looking at here shows Gaza and Israel today. The red dotted line is how far the Hamas forces Hamas terrorist forces came into Israel on October 7th, and the communities within that area that were devastated by their heinous attack. The yellow area is an area currently evacuated by Israel. So the people who live there are out of there. It's a closed military zone right now during the conflict. There's a similar evacuation that's taken place in the north of the country, where Hezbollah has been active and attacking into Israel. The red is the parts of Gaza that are under Hamas control, and the blue is where the Israelis are in control right now. That are where the operation is ongoing. And you can see there's a blue dotted line both in the north and in the south. That is an area, and I'm just saying it because it may be hard to read the legend, but that's an area, those are areas where Israel has asked for all of civilians to evacuate and to get out of harm's way. So that's just in a very quick sketch, a very high-level orientation around the conflict, how we got to where we are today, and what's happening.